Sofia gripped the hem of her worn apron tightly as she walked down the stuffy hospital corridors. Every step was a battle not to collapse right there, among people rushing past without even glancing at her. The constant beeping of her mother's heart monitor was a cruel reminder that the little time left was a currency she no longer had. Donna Helena, lying in that cold hospital bed, surrounded by wires and tubes, was all the family Sofia had in the world. And now, every faint heartbeat seemed to beg for something Sofia no longer knew how to provide. The doctors, impassive, listed the soaring costs of treatment as if they were discussing mere numbers, not a life slowly slipping away. Compassion had long been drained from that place, leaving only the cold precision of bills and medical charts. Back at the small apartment she shared with her mother, Sofia sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at the mountain of bills threatening to spill over the edge. Water, electricity, overdue rent, medications, urgent medical tests. The letters and numbers blurred together before her weary eyes. Working double shifts as a waitress barely covered the basic necessities. How could she possibly pay for emergency surgery and months of intensive care? Despair tightened around her chest like an invisible hand. She had tried everything: loans, favors, distant friends. Now only the bitter humiliation of surrendering to reality remained. It was in this moment, when hope resembled a trap more than a salvation, that Leonardo Montenegro's name entered her life, almost like a mirage. Sofia had heard whispers about him. Heir to one of the country's largest fortunes, a man famed for his icy demeanor and closed heart. Someone who treated emotions like bargaining chips, and had vowed never to fall in love. When an old friend, now an assistant at one of his companies, mentioned that Leonardo was seeking a wife for a marriage of convenience, Sofia laughed bitterly. A man like him would never look twice at someone like her. Yet the proposal lingered in her mind like a stubborn whisper. Enough money to save her mother, to pay for everything, in exchange for a hollow, paper-thin marriage. That night, Sofia lay awake staring at the ceiling, her mind racing. What was marriage if not a contract after all? Society had already turned love into a game of convenience long ago. She could endure the shame, the sacrifice, if it meant saving the only person who had ever truly loved her. Her pride screamed no, but love, fierce and desperate, roared yes, echoing with each painful thud of her heart. When the phone rang the next morning, confirming a meeting with Leonardo, it felt as if she had been swept into a current from which there was no escape. Their first meeting was cloaked in an atmosphere thick and sharp as broken glass. Leonardo Montenegro, with his eyes as dark as a starless night, evaluated Sofia as if she were nothing more than an item on a balance sheet. He spoke briefly, without embellishment. A marriage contract, undefined duration, immediate financial benefits for her, absolute discretion, no emotional involvement. In return, he would cover her mother's treatment and ensure their financial security. Sofia listened, numb, grasping at the last threads of her dignity as the ground beneath her feet gave way. On her way back home, Sofia's eyes burned, but she refused to cry. Accepting meant selling a part of her soul she had vowed never to trade. Refusing meant condemning her mother to a slow, merciless death. When she opened the door to her mother's room and saw her lying there, so fragile, so helpless, Sofia knew the choice had been made long before Leonardo appeared. That night, staring into the mirror, she whispered to herself that she was doing it for love, not for money. A necessary lie. A mask she would have to wear indefinitely. Days later, the contract was signed. No party, no vows, no love. Just a piece of paper sealing a destiny she never dreamed for herself. The ceremony would be quick, discreet, a formality to satisfy the curiosity of the few still interested in Leonardo Montenegro's life. Inside, Sofia felt like an actress trapped in the final act of a tragedy. And without realizing it, each step she took led her deeper into a maze of emotions, where finding the exit would be far harder than she ever imagined. The day of the wedding loomed on the horizon like a silent storm, and what awaited Sofia at the altar would prove far more devastating than any contract she had ever signed. The grand hall of the Montenegro estate seemed like a scene from another world. where luxury spread like a suffocating shroud over every corner. Crystal chandeliers cast golden reflections on the marble-clad walls, and the soft, calculated background music floated among forced smiles and empty conversations. Sofia, wrapped in a dazzling French lace gown, felt like an imposter in the middle of so much opulence. The fabric caressed her skin with an almost cruel softness, as if mocking the bitter reality behind that ceremony. In her mind, one truth echoed relentlessly. This was not love, it was survival. The ceremony, though splendid in the eyes of the guests, was colder than the harshest winter. Sofia walked down the aisle between rows of curious onlookers, her knees weak, her heart pounding, feeling she might collapse under the weight of it all. Each step resonated in the respectful silence of the gathered elite, but to her, it sounded like the drumming of an unseen execution. At the far end, Leonardo Montenegro awaited, motionless, his face as impenetrable as a stone monument. His eyes, dark and unfathomable as a stormy ocean, revealed nothing, no hint of tenderness, no flicker of hesitation. When she finally stood before him, Sofia could barely breathe. The officiant, dressed in sober black, began the proceedings with a monotone voice, reciting what should have been sacred vows as if he were narrating a business deal. Words meant to bind two souls hung lifeless in the air. There were no loving glances, no trembling hands seeking each other. Only brief nods, signatures on embossed papers, and a collective murmur of approval at the end. The ring Leonardo slipped onto Sofia's finger was cold and heavy, as if it carried the full weight of the carefully constructed lie they were about to live. After the brief, sterile, "I do," a hesitant applause rippled through the hall. There was no real joy, only the relieved satisfaction of witnessing yet another advantageous union between names and fortunes. Sofia quickly glanced at the faces around her and found them composed like masks at a carnival. Amidst the forced smiles and calculating eyes, she felt even smaller, even more misplaced, a flawed piece in a machine that turned without pity. Leonardo, beside her, offered his arm purely out of protocol. His touch was cold, like ice against her skin, and it ran through her body as a silent warning. At the reception that followed, Sofia became the centerpiece of a show that seemed to flow in slow motion. Impeccably dressed waiters glided among the guests, carrying trays of champagne and elaborate hors d'oeuvres. Sofia smiled mechanically at strangers who congratulated her on her good fortune, each word feeling like a hidden blade. Amid speeches of prosperity, exaggerated toasts, and empty promises, she fought to hide the vertigo threatening to consume her. From a corner of the room, she watched Leonardo engage in serious conversations with men in dark suits, his demeanor betraying that, for him, this marriage was just another calculated move on a chessboard of alliances. When the photographers called them for the traditional couple photos, Sofia's stomach twisted. She posed next to Leonardo, forcing a smile that never reached her eyes. His hand rested lightly on her waist, with the same casual detachment as one holds a wine glass. Each flash was a cruel reminder that this image would be immortalized. The perfect couple, the ideal union, the flawless facade. Behind Sofia's smile, however, lurked the sharp pain of someone who already knew that the entire performance was as fragile as glass and as dangerous as a closing trap. As the evening wore on, Sofia felt increasingly isolated. Words exchanged between her and Leonardo were few and formal, both seemingly avoiding any emotional contact that might expose their raw wounds. Each furtive glance she cast at him encountered an invisible wall, an impenetrable barrier keeping her at a safe distance from any budding hope. When the ceremony finally drew to a close, a strange sense of relief washed over her. Yet deep within her chest, a faint, almost imperceptible voice whispered that the worst was still to come. As the guests began to disperse and the grand hall grew hollow and silent, Sofia was led toward the bridal suite, where a new, even darker chapter of this cold bargain would begin to unfold before her, without warning. The bridal suite was grand, adorned in soft shades of gold and ivory, with a massive crystal chandelier hanging from the ceiling, casting a dim, trembling light over refined furniture and heavy curtains. Everything in that atmosphere seemed carefully designed to convey a sense of luxury and refinement. But to Sofia, the place was nothing more than a gilded prison. Her footsteps echoed in the cutting silence as she crossed the room, dragging the heavy train of her wedding dress like someone burdened by a fate she had never chosen. She stopped beside the immense canopy bed, its linen sheets so white they seemed almost blinding, and for a fleeting moment, she wished she could vanish into that void. Leonardo entered shortly after, the door closing behind him with a sharp click that reverberated through Sofia's chest like a muffled thunderclap. For a brief moment, the silence between them was absolute, a void filled only by the sound of restrained breathing. Sofia kept her gaze lowered, her trembling hands clutching the fabric of her dress, waiting for any gesture, any word that might bridge the abyss between them. Leonardo, however, did not approach her. Instead, he walked toward the writing desk where an envelope rested under the muted glow of a lamp. Without looking at her, Leonardo picked up the envelope and, with cold and precise movements, held it out. Sofia, confused, hesitated before stepping closer. When she finally took it in her hands, she felt the stiffness of the paper, and upon opening it, found banking documents and confirmation of a large transfer to an account opened in her name. There it was, the price of her freedom, of her mother's health, and of her own dignity, bartered like a luxury commodity. Each figure, although astronomical, weighed like a stone against her chest. Leonardo then spoke, his voice sharp and distant, as if reciting the final clause of a contract. He informed her that he would leave early the next morning for an extended business trip, and that, from that moment on, Sofia was free from any marital obligations. There would be no shared life, no companionship, only solitude within a house as grand and empty as her heart now felt. Leonardo offered no apologies, no explanations. For him, it was simply the finalization of a transaction successfully completed. Sofia felt the ground beneath her feet falter. Each word struck her harder than any humiliation she had feared. She had prepared herself to endure indifference, coldness, perhaps even contempt. But she had not prepared for being treated as disposable, like an object acquired and forgotten in the back of a drawer. She wanted to protest, to scream that even though she had agreed to the arrangement, she was still human, still deserved respect. Yet no words came. They were crushed by the weight of helplessness tightening around her throat. Without waiting for a response, Leonardo turned and disappeared down the hallway, leading to another room, leaving Sofia alone in the vast, oppressive suite. She stood there for long minutes, frozen, holding the envelope with blank, unfocused eyes. Outside, the night stretched endlessly, silent and indifferent, while the mansion sank into a heavy stillness that seemed to echo the hollowness inside her chest. When she finally moved, Sofia walked to the balcony, where the cold early morning wind swept the curtains inward. The sleeping city sprawled before her, indifferent to the sorrows hidden behind golden walls. She stared at the ring on her finger, so brilliant and heavy, and a single tear, slow and discreet, traced its path down her pale cheek. She had sold herself to save the woman she loved, and in return, had bought herself a prison made of luxury and loneliness. As the first pale light of dawn began to paint timid strokes across the horizon, Sofia remained there, motionless, a silent statue unaware that the first cracks in her world had already begun to form, ready to reveal secrets that could change everything she believed she knew about Leonardo Montenegro and the destiny she thought she had sealed forever. The following morning dawned gray, with heavy clouds covering the sky and a cold wind sweeping through the mansion gardens. Sofia woke alone in the vast bed, still wearing the silk nightgown she had found carefully folded on the armchair in the suite. Leonardo's absence was a constant echo in every corner of the silent room, and the envelope of banking documents remained on the nightstand, a cold and cruel reminder of everything she had sacrificed to save what she loved most. Slowly, she sat up, feeling every muscle protest, as if her own body refused to accept the new reality. When she made her way downstairs, she found the house immersed in an almost funereal quiet. The few staff members who crossed her path greeted her with distant politeness, treating her as if she were another ornamental piece in the grand setting. Leonardo had left hours earlier, without even a message, a note, or a word of farewell. The driver informed her, in an impersonal tone, that a car would be available whenever she wished, and that all her financial needs would be promptly covered, as stated in the contract. Sofia nodded silently, unable to trust her voice to conceal the bitterness rising in her throat. With nowhere else to go, she decided to visit the clinic where her mother, Donna Helena, was now receiving care. She climbed into the car and stared out the window as the city's blurred buildings and people passed by like scenes from a film she no longer belonged to. The clinic was everything it had promised to be: modern facilities, private rooms, specialized medical teams. Entering her mother's room, she found Donna Helena asleep, her expression serene, so different from the frail, fading figure Sofia had last seen. For the first time in days, a tear of relief slipped from Sofia's eyes, but it was mingled with a silent guilt, the heavy price she had paid for that fragile peace. Sofia spent hours by her mother's side, holding her hand gently, as if she could transfer some of the strength she herself no longer had. She spoke softly of small things, of trivialities, carefully concealing the deep wounds of her recent days. When Donna Helena finally opened her eyes and smiled with a tenderness that seemed to fill the entire room, Sofia smiled back. But inside, a question gnawed at her. Would she ever be able to tell her mother the truth? Would Donna Helena understand the sacrifice Sofia had made? Or would it crush her to know that the happiness she now enjoyed was built upon a love that had never existed? In the days that followed, Sofia divided her time between daily visits to the clinic and long, solitary hours wandering the endless corridors and empty halls of the mansion. Each luxurious piece of furniture, each artwork hanging on the walls, reinforced the chasm between Leonardo's world and her own. Meals were served promptly, but Sofia barely touched the carefully prepared dishes, feeling increasingly like a stranger inhabiting a life that was never hers. At night, when the silence grew denser, she would sit on the balcony and stare at the empty sky, searching for answers among the distant stars. It was during one of those sleepless nights that things began to shift. First came the subtle signs: doors closing hurriedly when she approached, whispered conversations between staff, glances that quickly turned away when they noticed her presence. Then came the silent phone calls, rings that would stop after just one tone, as if someone on the other end had changed their mind at the last second. Sofia tried to ignore them, convincing herself it was simply her exhausted mind playing tricks on her. But the unease inside her grew, fed by every new shadow that crossed her path. One particularly cold afternoon, returning from another visit to the clinic, Sofia found a small envelope slipped under her bedroom door. There was no sender, just a simple sheet of paper with a few words written in a firm hand. Not everything is what it seems. Be careful whom you trust. Sofia's heart raced. For long minutes, she stood frozen, staring at the cryptic message. Who had sent it? What were they trying to warn her about? And most importantly, why now? Holding the note between her trembling fingers, Sofia felt, for the first time since that grim wedding, something awaken inside her. An urgent need to understand the truth hidden beneath the surface of her new reality. Unknowingly, she had just taken the first step into uncovering a story far more complex and dark than anything she could have ever imagined. The following days were marked by a silent tension that seemed to seep into the mansion's walls like a persistent, cold mist. Sofia, now more alert to the small signs she had once tried to ignore, began to observe everything around her with sharpened eyes, like someone walking on a mined field, fully aware that any wrong step could be fatal. The whispered conversations of the staff, the way certain hallways were avoided when she passed, the glances heavy with something she could not yet name. Everything hinted at a hidden story, a truth buried beneath the polished surface of the life that had been imposed upon her. Determined not to remain a mere spectator of her own existence, Sofia began to explore the mansion more carefully. She avoided asking direct questions, preferring to collect fragments of information from silences and stray words that floated in the air when they thought she wasn't listening. It was on a rainy afternoon, wandering through the second-floor corridors, that she found a door slightly ajar, with soft light spilling out and muted voices whispering inside. She approached silently, barely breathing, and peered through the narrow opening. Inside, two employees spoke with tense expressions. One of them, a middle-aged woman Sofia vaguely recognized from the kitchen, murmured that it was only a matter of time before the truth came to light, and that the boss had done everything possible to prevent Sofia from finding out. The other, a simple-looking gardener, replied nervously that it was no longer their concern, that they should just do their jobs and keep their heads down. Sofia stepped back before they noticed her heart pounding so loudly it seemed to echo through the walls. That brief conversation, more than the anonymous letter, ignited in Sofia a fury mixed with fear. She now knew there was far more behind Leonardo's cold abandonment, a secret that everyone seemed desperate to keep hidden, and she was determined to uncover it, no matter the cost. But where to begin? Rummaging through Leonardo's personal belongings would be too risky, especially in a house where every smile might conceal a betrayal. Then she remembered something she had barely registered amidst the chaos of the wedding day. During the brief walk to the bridal suite, she had noticed, at the end of a corridor, a dark wooden door secured with an old lock. At the time, when she had looked curiously in that direction, one of the staff members had quickly closed off the passage, offering a vague excuse. Distracted by her own tragedy, Sofia had not pressed the matter. But now, that memory glowed in her mind, like a beacon cutting through the darkness. Moved by a mixture of fear and determination, Sofia waited until the mansion was plunged into its usual deep, midnight silence. Barefoot to avoid making noise, she crossed the cold corridors, guided only by the faint light of the moon filtering through the high windows. When she finally stood before the dark door, a shiver ran down her spine. The doorknob was heavy and old, creaking softly under her touch. As she expected, it was locked. But while feeling around the frame, her fingers brushed against something, a small key hidden inside an ornate decorative panel. With trembling hands, she inserted the key and turned it. A dry click shattered the silence, and the door creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and ancient wood. Sofia hesitated, fear clenching her chest, but the need for answers pushed her forward. She grabbed a small flashlight she had hidden under her coat and carefully descended the steps, each one drawing her deeper into a story that had been denied to her. At the bottom of the staircase, she found a small room, crowded with old document boxes, paintings draped in cloth, dusty furniture, and in the center, a heavy desk where a worn leather diary lay, the initials LM stamped on the cover. The air was heavy, as if every object guarded secrets that had fought long and hard to stay hidden. Sofia approached with reverence, her hands trembling, and opened the diary, its yellowed pages releasing a sweet, decaying scent of aged paper. What she read in the first few paragraphs made her blood run cold. It revealed not only that Leonardo had planned their marriage long before she ever knew who he was, but also that it involved a promise made to someone from his past, a moral debt forcing him to marry in order to fulfill a will. Yet what stunned her even more was that it was not just about financial interests. The entries spoke of hidden emotions, buried regrets, desperate decisions. Every word was a puzzle piece forming a picture far more intricate and unsettling than anything she had imagined. Heart pounding, Sofia turned page after page, unaware that among those faded lines, she would not only find the answers she sought, but also truths powerful enough to turn upside down everything she believed about Leonardo, about herself, and about the destiny she once thought was sealed. The reunion between Sofia and Leonardo came like a jolt of reality on an afternoon she least expected. After days immersed in the yellowed pages of the diary, trying to stitch together the fragments of that hidden story, Sofia decided she needed to leave the mansion, if only for a few hours, to breathe air that wasn't so heavy with unspoken memories. She went to the clinic to visit Donna Helena, as she had been doing religiously, and upon arriving, found the place more lively than usual. A small charity fair was being held in the gardens of the medical center, with white tents, soft music, and children darting between improvised stalls. At first, Sofia felt out of place, as if the brightness of the event clashed cruelly against the gray weight she carried in her chest. But something in the unpretentious joy of those around her slowly eased her spirit, and she allowed herself to wander among the tents, observing quietly. That was when, turning around, her eyes met his. Leonardo was there, alive, real, even more imposing than in her recent memories. He was dressed simply, almost casually, but nothing about his presence was casual. Every line of his face, every restrained movement of his hands, radiated that unmistakable intensity that had always disturbed her. For a moment, time seemed suspended. Sofia felt her heart hammering in her chest, as if her body were betraying her, revealing emotions she had tried to bury every morning since their parting. Leonardo saw her too. His eyes, once impenetrable, flashed with a momentary surprise, perhaps even something deeper, something that disappeared as quickly as it had surfaced. Yet no words were exchanged. They stood still, only a few meters apart, like two survivors of a silent war, unsure how to begin again. Sofia, driven by an impulse she could not explain, turned and walked away. Her steps were quick, almost clumsy, fueled by the urgent need to escape something that felt larger than herself. She slipped past the stalls and through the smiling crowds, unaware of the tears threatening to spill past the careful barriers she had built. But she didn't get far. A firm hand caught her arm, not with force, but with a commanding gentleness that was unmistakably Leonardo's. When she turned around, his eyes were there, closer than they should have been, more intense than she could bear. They stood facing each other amid the fair's chaos, as if the world around them had blurred into an indistinct haze. Leonardo opened his mouth, hesitated, as if struggling against something within himself, and finally spoke, his voice low and heavy, each syllable laden with weight. He asked if she was all right. Such a simple question, so trivial on the surface, but it carried the full weight of everything left unsaid between them. Sofia didn't respond immediately. Words tangled in her throat, trapped between wounded pride and the raw pain that still throbbed in her chest. She wanted to scream, to demand why he had abandoned her so brutally, why he had left her alone with nothing but a contract and a bleeding wound. She wanted answers to make sense of the empty days and lonely nights. But all she managed was to meet his gaze, sustaining it with the same intensity he offered. Their battle didn't need raised voices. It was fought in silence, wordless, but no less devastating. Leonardo seemed to sense her resistance. His expression softened slightly, and with an unexpected gesture, he asked for a few minutes, somewhere quiet to speak. He said there were things he needed to tell her, truths he owed her. Sofia, against all her mind's warnings, felt herself nodding. Perhaps it was the lingering influence of the diary's revelations. Perhaps it was the desperate need for closure, or perhaps it was simply her heart, that relentless traitor, answering a call her reason could no longer silence. They walked together toward a quieter wing of the clinic, away from the music, the voices, and the fleeting celebration. The long, silent corridor felt like the perfect stage for the confessions and buried sorrows that were about to surface, for the revelations that would begin to unravel a past neither of them had truly left behind. The clinic's white corridor seemed to stretch endlessly ahead of them as Sofia and Leonardo walked side by side, their steps heavy with everything left unsaid. Neither dared to break the silence until they found a small, empty room, where tall windows allowed the filtered afternoon light to spill in soft beams across the wooden floor. Leonardo gestured for them to enter and close the door behind them, sealing them off from the world, as if here, finally, the past could be stripped of all its masks. For a moment, they stood facing each other, only a few steps apart, trapped in a tension so dense it felt almost tangible, like the heavy air before a storm. Sofia crossed her arms instinctively, a shield against the wave of emotions threatening to rise, while her gaze, though turbulent, did not waver from his. Leonardo drew a deep breath, the kind taken before plunging into wounds too long ignored. When he spoke, his voice was no longer that of the cold man she had married. It was lower, rougher, as if each word were a confession torn from him with pain. He began by admitting that he knew he had hurt her. He did not try to justify his absence, nor the coldness with which he had treated her, as if understanding that for some wounds, no excuse could ever truly heal. Instead, he spoke of old promises, of debts not born from financial contracts, but from bonds far deeper, far older. He revealed that years earlier, when he was still young, he had been engaged to a woman named Isabella, an intense, consuming love that had ended in tragedy after a cascade of betrayals and lies, not his own, but hers. Leonardo described how, on his father's deathbed, he had been given one final condition: to inherit the full estate and maintain the integrity of the family business, he would have to marry someone chosen not for money or status, but for purity of character. A woman who, in the old man's eyes, could symbolize a chance at redemption for a lineage marked by pride and mistakes. Isabella's death soon after had left Leonardo even more broken, turning him into a man incapable of trust, incapable of love. Sofia listened in silence, her arms tightening around herself, as if trying to hold back the storm building within. Leonardo confessed that when he first learned of her, through reports, discreet observations, glimpses from afar, he saw something he thought had long disappeared. Honesty, genuine kindness, a light that shone without needing grand gestures. But gripped by fear, he had crafted a calculated plan where emotions would have no place, where love would be kept at bay. He had chosen her to fulfill the will's requirement and, at the same time, to protect his own shattered heart. That was why he had disappeared so quickly after the wedding, fleeing not from her, but from the feelings that had begun to rise and threaten the walls he had so carefully built around himself. Leonardo spoke of sleepless nights, of days buried in numbers and business deals to avoid facing the growing emptiness inside. Each word was a thread pulled from the web of secrets that had held him captive for so long. Sofia felt each confession like a blade slicing through her defenses. There was anger, sharp and rightful, at being used, discarded, treated like a pawn in a cruel game. But beneath it, there was something else, something harder to ignore. A suffering mirrored in his eyes, a sorrow she recognized all too well because it echoed her own. For all this time, they had both been prisoners, he of his ghosts, she of her wounds. When Leonardo finally fell silent, the quiet between them was different. It was no longer the silence of accusation or fear, but the raw, vulnerable stillness of someone who had laid everything bare without knowing if he would be forgiven. He took a step toward her, slow, as if approaching a flame he feared might burn him. His eyes sought hers, not with arrogance, but with a silent plea. Sofia remained still, feeling her breath heavy, words struggling to form. She knew that whatever she said next could either build a fragile bridge between them, or shatter the moment completely. She stood at the edge of a precarious crossing, aware that the next step could either save her or send her tumbling into the abyss. But before she could decide, before courage or resentment could win the war within her, Leonardo, in an unexpected gesture, extended his hand to her. Not as part of a contract, but as a silent plea for something he had never known how to ask for: forgiveness. And in that moment, with a single touch hovering on the brink of happening or being rejected, the past, the present, and the future seemed to compress into one suspended breath, about to collapse under the weight of everything still left to be said, felt, and decided. The touch never happened. Sofia took a step back, not out of fear of Leonardo, but because of the avalanche of emotions crashing over her like an invisible current. Memories of the days of abandonment, of the crushing silence, of the empty looks in the mansion's hallways, stormed her mind with brutal force. She simply could not ignore how much it had hurt, how much it still hurt. Leonardo stood there for a few eternal seconds, his hand suspended in the air before letting it fall to his side, unable to hide the bitter collapse reflected in his eyes. The silence between them grew heavier, thicker, as if every unspoken word weighed down the air like lead. Sofia looked away, fixing her gaze on some indistinct point in the room while she struggled to organize her thoughts. She did not want to be cruel, but she also could not pretend that the wounds had simply vanished. When she finally spoke, her voice was low but firm, raw from the emotion tightening in her throat. She said she needed time, that the wounds she carried were too deep to be healed by a handful of confessions. That words, however sincere, could not erase the loneliness she had lived through, nor the cold of the nights when love seemed nothing more than a distant memory, almost a hallucination. Leonardo listened in silence, not interrupting, not defending himself. He simply watched her, absorbing every syllable as if each one etched itself into his very skin. But Sofia said something she herself had not expected. She admitted that, despite everything, a part of her wanted to understand. Wanted perhaps to rebuild, at her own pace, the ruins of what had never truly begun. She did not know if she could. She made no promises of forgiveness, much less of love, She merely left open a fragile possibility, like a flame flickering in the wind. And that was what made it even more painful. The uncertainty. The terrifying sensation of walking blindfolded across a crumbling bridge. Leonardo, hearing her, gave a small nod. He did not insist. He did not plead. With a resigned sigh, he said he would wait, for as long as it took. That he knew he had no right to demand anything of her. That he would respect any decision she made. But, however paradoxical it might seem, he needed to tell her that he loved her. Not the way he had loved Isabella. Blindly, possessively, but in a way that was rawer, more painful, born from absence, regret, and the aching awareness of what could have been if he had only been brave enough. That confession hit Sofia like a wave crashing against rocks. Part of her wanted to surrender, to be carried away by the raw emotion pulsing from every word he spoke. Another part, wounded and wary, screamed that it would take more than words to rebuild a story that had collapsed before it even started. So, when she answered, her voice shook but carried conviction. She asked Leonardo to say no more. To prove it with actions, not promises. To show it, if he truly meant it. To earn not only her heart, but her trust, now as fragile and battered as a battlefield abandoned to the ruins. Leonardo agreed without hesitation. There was a resigned sadness in his eyes, but also a flicker of hope. The quiet hope of a man who understood that perhaps, just perhaps, there was still a path back from the emotional exile they had both endured. And so, without any grand gesture, he stepped back, respecting her space, understanding that true love, when real, does not impose itself. It offers itself and waits, like a flower surviving the long winter. Sofia remained there, unmoving, watching him slowly walk away, each of his steps echoing long and heavy down the silent corridors of the clinic. When the door finally closed behind him, she let out the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She leaned against the cold wall and slid to the floor, drawing her knees to her chest, her gaze lost between the pain of what they had lived and the uncertainty of what might still be possible. Because even though she would not admit it, not even to herself, a stubborn part of her heart kept asking, what if there was still a chance, however small, to rewrite their story? And while that question throbbed quietly within her, outside that room, Leonardo was already planning the first step of the long road he would have to walk to prove to Sofia, with actions rather than words, that not every love is doomed to end in ruins. Leonardo wasted no time. From that silent moment when Sofia had offered him not a promise, but a fragile hope, he decided he would no longer allow fear to paralyze him. He began almost imperceptibly, with small gestures that seemed casual, but carried a sincere intent to rebuild the shattered bridge between them. The next morning, without announcement or grandeur, he arranged for the clinic's garden, the same garden where Sofia loved to walk with her mother, to be restored. The flowers she had once admired, missing during the last spring, now bloomed timidly among the trees. Sofia noticed. She said nothing, but she noticed. Just as she noticed Leonardo's quiet presence at odd hours, leaving books she liked on a table at the clinic, sending small baskets of fruit to the patient's wing, donating without applause, without spectacle. It was as if he were trying to rebuild not just their relationship, but himself, the man who for so long had hidden behind contracts and fortune. She kept her distance, cautious. She watched from afar, her heart torn between distrust and the flickering warmth of emotion. Each of Leonardo's gestures was like a gentle knock against the walls she had built, subtle but relentless, slowly cracking the stones of her defenses. Perhaps that was why, one day, without thinking, without planning, Sofia accepted his silent invitation when he approached with 2 cups of coffee in his hands, offering one with a restrained smile, saying nothing. They sat together under the shade of a broad tree, where the scent of newly planted flowers mingled with the rich aroma of coffee. For long minutes they spoke no words. Only the distant sound of children playing in the gardens filled the space between them. Yet, in that silence, an invisible conversation unfolded, a fragile truce that needed no language. Leonardo, in a voice softer than Sofia had ever heard, began speaking of the past, not to justify himself, but to reveal his scars. He told stories of his childhood, of suffocating expectations, of the loneliness hidden behind the high walls of his wealth. Sofia listened intently, feeling for the first time that she was meeting not the cold air, not the absent husband, but the man beneath the armor, vulnerable, human. Their meetings became more frequent, always casual, always discreet. A short walk through the clinic's corridors, a shared glance over improvised lunches, a whispered conversation by the window as the afternoon faded into gold. Sofia found herself laughing again, shyly at first, surprised to find joy where she had known only pain. Leonardo, sensing each fragile opening, never rushed her. He did not push forward, but instead offered steady ground beneath her hesitant steps. With time, Sofia also saw changes in the mansion, once a monument to her loneliness. Leonardo, without making it a grand gesture, had transformed one of the cold, empty salons into a warm library, with soft armchairs, light curtains, and a wide window that flooded the room with sunlight. It was not an attempt to impress her. It was a quiet message that he was willing to make that place a home, not a prison. Yet even among these gestures, there were difficult days. Days when Sofia woke suffocated by memories, when fear shouted louder than hope, when the old pain threatened to swallow all the progress they had made. Leonardo, on those days, made no demands, no protests. He simply stayed close, at whatever distance she needed, understanding that real love is patient, and real healing cannot be rushed. It was on an especially cold afternoon, as they walked quietly among the newly planted rose bushes in the clinic's garden, that Sofia suddenly stopped, her gaze lost among the fragile branches. Leonardo stopped too, a few steps behind her, respecting her space. Sofia turned to him, her eyes shining with a mix of fear and resolve, and before she could doubt herself, she whispered almost inaudibly. She asked if he would still be willing to start over, even knowing the road ahead would be slow, imperfect, and full of open wounds. Leonardo did not answer with words. He took a hesitant step forward, as if each inch cost him effort, and extended his hand, just as he had once before. But this time, Sofia did not retreat. She looked at his outstretched hand, at the simple, sincere gesture, and felt her defenses begin to crumble inside her, like snow melting under the first warm sun of spring. With her heart hammering wildly, Sofia slowly reached out her hand and touched his fingers. A soft, almost imperceptible contact, but one that carried the full weight of a choice. The choice to try, to build something new from the ruins of what had been broken, to give love a real chance, even if it would always bear the scars they both carried. And as their hands finally touched, the cold afternoon breeze seemed to soften, as if fate itself were quietly making room for the new story beginning to be written between them. The touch between their hands, as light as a whisper, was the invisible thread that pulled Sofia and Leonardo out from the ruins of their past. It was a simple gesture, but it carried the weight of everything they had lived, everything they had suffered, and, more importantly, everything they could still build. From that moment on, what existed between them was no longer the shadow of what could have been, nor the pain that had screamed through their lonely nights. It was a new story, written with trembling but determined hands, willing to begin again. The days that followed felt like waking from a long winter. Slowly, Sofia and Leonardo allowed themselves to discover who they were beyond the scars they bore. They started with small steps, an afternoon planting flowers together in the clinic garden, their hands dirty with soil and their hearts clear of unrealistic expectations. A simple dinner on the mansion's veranda, where the wine was modest, and the laughter, though fragile, was genuine. There were no grand promises, no theatrical declarations. There was presence, constancy, the quiet rebuilding of a trust reborn in each glance, each timid touch, each word spoken without hurry. Leonardo had changed. He was no longer the shielded man who had used silence as armor and distance as refuge. Now, he was someone willing to listen, to bend, to expose his vulnerabilities without fear of judgment. Sofia, in turn, discovered a strength within herself she hadn't known existed. a strength forged not by suffering, but by the ability to believe again, to open her heart without losing herself, to love without erasing who she was. Their relationship was not perfect. There were still days when the past whispered painful memories, when fear overshadowed hope, when old wounds threatened to swallow their progress. But unlike before, now they faced it together. When the pain surfaced, they met it with long conversations at midnight, with hands intertwined beneath the blankets, with silences respected and tears shared. They understood that true love does not ignore scars. It accepts them, builds bridges over them, and grows stronger in their presence. Over time, the clinic became more than the place where Dona Helena's life had been saved. It became the quiet cradle of a new life. Sofia and Leonardo began investing in it, creating social programs to care for those in need, offering hope to those who had long forgotten how to believe. The garden, once neglected, now bloomed year-round, reflecting their own journey. Beautiful not despite the hardships, but because of them. It was on a golden morning, beneath the same arbor where their fingers had first brushed, that Leonardo, kneeling on the damp earth, pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. There was no audience, no luxury, only Sofia's teary, surprised eyes and the sound of the wind whispering promises through the trees. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. The essential words had already been written in the silent gestures that led them here. Even so, his voice, thick with emotion, murmured that he wanted to be her home if she was still willing to try, this time without contracts, without fears, without secrets. Sofia, her hands trembling, did not answer immediately. She let the silence hover between them, the final test of the truth they now shared. She looked at Leonardo, not a perfect man, but a real one, made of flaws, regrets, and a love matured by pain. And she knew in that instant that yes, she could truly begin again. Not because he had changed alone, but because she too had learned that true love is not the absence of pain. It is the daily choice to stay, to care, to rebuild together. Her answer came in the form of a smile, bright as the first sun after a long storm, and in a whisper that melted into the breeze, Sofia said yes. Leonardo slipped the ring onto her finger with trembling hands, and there, in that forgotten corner of the garden, where once there had been only silence and solitude, something new bloomed. A living promise, planted in fertile soil, nourished by everything they had endured, flourishing beyond the shadows of the past. And as they embraced, feeling their hearts finally beating in unison, they knew, without needing anything more, that rewriting their story was possible for those brave enough to face their fears, and tender enough to believe that despite the scars, love, when true, always finds a way to bloom again. If you made it this far and felt moved by this story as much as we did while telling it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to experience many more stories that touch the soul and warm the heart. Leave your like, comment below, sharing your thoughts about this journey of resilience and true love, and share the video with someone you know who will be touched by it too. Your interaction is very important for our community to continue growing and bringing even more unforgettable stories to you. See you next time.